السلام عليكم، صباح الخير، أهلا وسهلا بكم من جديد. كيف الحال؟ إن شاء الله اليوم أفضل، إن شاء الله اليوم متحمسين أكثر كمان. اليوم يوم جديد، نتمنى أنه يكون أمس للأمانة كان يوم ثري، كان يوم ملهم، كان يوم سعيد. اليوم نتمنى أيضا أنه يكون يوم ثري، يوم ملهم، يوم أسعد. عمر قال لي اليوم إن شاء الله حنبدأ على طول في الموضوع. جلسة، ما نبي نطول مقدمات، واضح ما شاء الله متحمسين. هندخل في جلسة عن اتجاهات جديدة في القطاع الرقمي الإقليمي والعالمي. الجلسة هذه راح تجمع أبرز المستثمرين، راح يتكلموا عن ابتكارات جديدة في هذا المجال واتجاهات متوقعة للتقنية. هل حنطير؟ هل حيجينا الدوام بدل ما نروح له؟ أسئلة إن شاء الله راح نجاوبها في هذه الجلسة. راح يدير هذه الجلسة بوي بالوغان، هو المدير العام في شركة فيوتشر تك ميديا. يتخصص بوي بمساعدة العلامات التجارية على تسريع التسويق الرقمي وتحقيق التحول السريع فيها. I'd like to welcome Mr. Boy Balogan to the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It feels a bit like London in here today, right? Is anyone a bit cold, a bit freezing? Definitely me. So thank you. Today's session is a panel talking about new directions and trends in technology and digital in the Middle East and North Africa region. We've got an exciting lineup. Unfortunately, we've had one drop out, but we've got an exciting lineup of panelists. The people that actually investing their money in technology and digital, and they're going to navigate, they're going to take us through the big trends, what they've seen in 2016, and the big bets for 2017. Generally, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and its massive rise in 2016. We're going to be talking about the rise of the virtual personal assistants, so everything from Alexa, to Cortana, to Siri, which hopefully should be household names to everyone now. And we're going to take it a little bit further, talking about video streaming, the rise of Netflix and the global rollout, and not forgetting the sharing economy, not only Uber, but also what the manufacturers are doing, car manufacturers are doing with autonomous vehicles. So I think, needless to say, it's been a very exciting space in 2016 in terms of technology, and I'll ask some pretty tough questions for the guys that invest in this space, both from a regional point of view, what's going on globally, but also from a local perspective, I guess, which is where we're more interested. So introducing to the stage our panelists for today, starting with Sumit Jan, who is General Partner of Luma Capital Partners. Thank you. If you don't know Luma Capital Partners, if you've ever seen the Lumascapes, the framework of tech companies and digital companies, these are the guys that put it together, so welcome. Secondly, we've got Sharif Al-Badawi, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's partner at 500 Startups, heavily invested in the region in terms of technology and digital. Thanks, guys. How's ArabNet been for you so far?
Wonderful.
So far, so good. I've had a great 2 days so far.
Excellent, excellent. I think a lot of people will be particularly interested in your views on technology, specifically in MENA region, because you're the guys that invest in startups and funds and technology, both globally and regionally. And it's probably a better litmus test to follow where the money is, rather than where the buzz is, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption.
Right. Do you mind just telling the audience a little bit about what you do? We'll start with you, Sharif.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a partner at 500 Startups focused on the Middle East Fund. It's a seed stage fund. Everything we do at 500 Startups right now is at the seed stage. So these are small checks, and we make lots of little bets into promising founders who have technology enabled business that can help them scale up here in the region, either addressing local problems or global problems. And have seen a little bit of market traction.
Excellent. Sumit?
Sure. So I'm a co-founder, general partner of Luma Capital Partners. We're a venture capital firm focused at the intersection of what we think of as digital media, technology, and marketing. And all three of those things have massive transformation and undergoing continued massive transformation. We always say that what we'll see in a few years will be completely different than everything we've seen in the past. My own background has been a long time in investing. Just before this, I was at Intel Capital, the venture capital arm of Intel Corporation, and there leading the digital media investing effort. And prior to that, at another venture capital firm, and started at Goldman Sachs as an investment banker. So kind of a long time on the investing world, but always around digital media and marketing technology.
Brilliant, thank you. So, I mean, the year hasn't ended yet. We're still in 2016, a couple of weeks ago. It'd be interesting to know what you guys identified as the biggest trends this year before we move to 2017. What's been really exciting for you from an investment point of view? What are you looking at and going, well, that's going to trend, and that's where we're going to be putting our money?
I'll start. One thing I'll say is that a lot of times what's very interesting and exciting isn't necessarily the same group that is the place we've been investing or isn't investing. And the reason I say that is a lot of things have a lot of excitement and hype, and there's a classic Gartner hype cycle. And so I would say that many times we're not necessarily investing in what everyone's talking about, but what people have been talking about and are starting to turn into real interesting businesses. So first, what everybody's talking about, at least in Silicon Valley, is virtual reality, augmented reality, and its impact and everything. I would say second is autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, drones, but sort of the reinvention of transportation. And then I would say third is probably AI, intelligence that's created through machines, and that translates, and there's differences between what's machine learning, what's AI, etc. But those are, I would say, in 2016, three of the big things that has captured a lot of attention and captured a lot of people thinking creatively about how these things will transform and how they will really fundamentally change businesses and industries on a go-forward basis. From an investing perspective, we're looking at all those things, but waiting to see a little bit about how those businesses evolve. And investing, we still think that there's a lot happening in commerce and e-commerce, and the new technologies around that, and more specifically, how brands can go direct to consumer. They may not need a retail channel. How brands are better at positioning themselves in a market where more and more things are purchased online. So there's some investing happening there. Another area is social and digital media, which is that I still believe that we're still in the early stages of that, which is that we're only just starting to see what it means when the world is connected socially, and how that changes how products get marketed, how consumers find out about products, and how information is exchanged. And so we've made some investments in both of those areas, which I'm happy to talk about.
I think what I would add to what Samita said is, in addition to those areas which are thematic, hype areas right now, and they're going to be interesting soon, but it's unclear really where we should be investing in those fields. So there are going to be a lot of cycles, a lot of failed companies, a lot of money raised and put into AR, VR, IoT, I'd say even Bitcoin, blockchain. Like, we just don't know where it's going to go and what's going to end up sticking in those models. There was an era where health tech was very big and everyone was creating the one platform to rule them all. Those were times where we have to be a little bit more cautious about how we make our bets. What I am most interested, I think, in the next year, so a little bit more shorter term, is what has been coined sort of as the third wave, where we're going to take regular industries and apply technology to them. That's real. That is not hyperbola. That is not something that we're just going to guess whether it's going to work or not. Especially when it comes to emerging markets, which is a focus of 500 startups and myself, where we're going to take government, agriculture, logistics and old industries, and start to apply technology to make those industries better. Of course, fintech and health tech and all of these other things are a part of that. But I think what's most interesting to me is we're going to see a biggest delta currently from the status quo to what a few years of technology can do in government and in agriculture and in basic infrastructural needs, particularly in emerging markets, to bring them up to the 20th century. So for me, those are very interesting. That doesn't mean that 75% of the deals that we will make this year aren't going to be regular consumer products, B2B, SaaS, on-demand, sharing economy, commerce, next generation sort of commerce plays. Of course, that will be interesting. It will make money in the short term. They're not going to necessarily be world-changing ideas, but they will make money, and they're businesses that actually don't exist here yet. So we'll see probably 70% of the deals seeing a global success and localizing that success, and without trivializing that as a copycat or a clone model. I think I've learned to appreciate the nuance involved in localizing a service like that. So that will be interesting for us. It will be most interesting or easier for those companies to raise from local VCs because it's their market. Harder to raise from US or European or Asian VCs for those types of products. But there are 30% that are a little bit more exciting, especially for foreign investment, which is a proprietary or innovative technology born here in the region that has a global application and a global audience. So those companies may become Delaware Corps, may move to the US and establish themselves among the ranks of the best startups in the world.
Okay.
And drones are pretty noisy too.
It's a drone, of course. It's a tech panel. So I think one of the things the audience will be really interested in is how MENA and your investment approach is different from your global approach. In San Fran, for example, are there trends specific to this market? Are there any points of uniqueness that you guys are looking at? Are there any changes, any differences you've seen in terms of investing in the tech and digital field in the Middle East?
I mean, there's a bit of a return to the 90s-ish in the way that entrepreneurs tend to have, on average, a little bit more grit and are driven by necessity versus, this is cool, why don't we all go build startups and, I can raise $3 million in a month in the Valley. I miss the old days, and we see that in every emerging market still. Second, it's a lot less expensive to do deals here. It's almost shocking sometimes when a startup finishes their pitch and when they have the ask slide that they're actually looking, saying how much money that they're raising, and the whole raise is $15,000 or $50,000 in some of the North African countries. That is very little capital to get going. In Egypt, which is sort of the engineering hub right now for the region, we are seeing startups being able to have a team of 30, 40 people, mostly engineering, and take $100,000 and stretch that over 18 months. I mean, that's their seed raise, and they get to the milestones they need to raise a Series A based on just that much capital. So they're less expensive. They can go a lot further with the dollar. They are addressing typically not just profitable businesses that will grow, but some kind of social impact or so double bottom line. Just invariably, that's how it ends up happening, whether they intended for it to or not. So this is a very attractive market in that sense. And it's not just happening here in the Middle East and North Africa. It's happening all over the world in emerging markets. I mean, entrepreneurship is now a global phenomenon. So you get to see founders who, it's ride or die for them. I mean, this is, they really mean it when they're trying to do these startups. Dubai might be an exception to that rule, but generally in the other countries, they work very hard for very little capital. And that, I think, will translate to, or we hope, in the next couple years, very inexpensive exit opportunities for other companies like in Europe and the US to come in and acquire these. It's actually a necessity for the ecosystem here. It's the one missing component. But it doesn't always have to come from the outside. What we're doing is advising and encouraging corporates, larger companies here in the Middle East, to start to interact with these startups, and basically 3 different ways. Become their customers, partners, do strategic investments in them, and then eventually, if you like them, acquire them. And that will complete the cycle. We have every other component. We have capital, especially in the GCC. We have talent all over, especially in Levant and North Africa, engineering talent mainly, I'd say. But we have every other component. We have users. Consumption here in Saudi, for example, is very high in a lot of the social media companies. So I think, and commerce. So we have every other bit of the cycle. The one worrying bit right now, and so those of us who are investing here in the region, we're sort of betting the farm on it, is that we'll eventually get to that point of exits. And without that, we don't have an ecosystem.
Sumit, you guys are setting a fund here next year, if that's accurate. What are you looking for? And what kind of companies are you looking to invest in? What's interesting from you guys from a venture capitalist point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I want to add one thing that I would say may be missing potentially. And one of the things that we look for is an appropriate level of risk appetite, which a lot of parts of the world, you have a lot of the things, the pieces there, but people are unwilling to take the risk. And by risk, I mean, as a large company, the risk of working with a small company, the risk of partnering with a small company, the risk of buying a company. And so I hear in many parts of the world, gosh, we're so used to investing in real estate, and it's a known asset, and we understand how it works, and bridging and making that delta and the mindset change of how do I, now think about things a little bit differently and think about taking a larger risk with a potential larger reward that's even more transformative. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking, I think, that sometimes it takes some time to evolve, and that's a key piece in my mind that, it takes some time to get there. When you have that, that's one of the missing pieces that make a lot of ecosystems work. From an investing perspective, I always think of there's a lot of advantages for a company to be serving their local market. Fundamentally understanding that market, fundamentally knowing the consumers, fundamentally knowing distribution channels. There's a lot of reasons why global companies can't penetrate a local market effectively. Case point, where everyone's globally talking about Uber, but they're still facing challenges in different markets where there's differences in how those markets operate. Travel is another great example. There's these massive, large global travel companies that aren't able to necessarily penetrate different markets. So I guess what we look for is really the capability and the understanding of a local market at such a great level that there's a real reason why this company can win, be dominant in that local market, and outcompete a global competitor. And that's rare because, unfortunately, more often than not, what I see is companies that try to copy the global competitor and do what they do locally, which usually results in that global competitor ending up winning because they just have more resources. So it's really more of the opposite, which is, how do you really take advantage of your knowledge of the local market, your knowledge of this nation, of this economy, to outcompete the global competitors?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, obviously, companies you've invested in and companies you've got your eyes on. Just generally, are you willing to share any companies from the tech and digital field that you potentially interested in or already invested in that we should be looking out for in terms of their business and services over the next 18 months? Some names would be nice.
Some names, huh?
Potentially those you've already invested in.
One recent one that we're really excited about, they ended up winning the MIT Enterprise Forum finals for MENA here in Jeddah, actually, was WrapUp. Okay. So if I'm name-dropping companies, I'm name-dropping them. Yeah. They're, to me, a brilliant team composed of both business and engineering side. The engineering feat that they're trying to accomplish is just a phenomenal thing. And it's, to Sumit's point and what I was mentioning earlier, we love to see an innovation born in the region where there's nothing like it in the world, but the customer base, the audience, the businesses that will use it are all over the world. And WrapUp is doing something like that. They're here. They're building their product here. It's a technology where it will record business meetings or meetings within companies among teams, identify voices, recognize action items. Basically, it will parse your entire meeting through vocal audio, and then it'll send you all summaries with each person's action items already outlined in it. So we all know how much time we spend in meetings. I was at Google for 7 years. We do a lot of meetings internally, and I'm sure everyone does. So that to me is an exciting company. We've already had interest from the U.S. Of companies. I've made introductions to them where they already want to acquire them, and they've only raised a seed round so far. So you can see how the excitement, the dynamics differ quite a bit when, from a company that says we're going to be, the next food delivery company in the Middle East, or something that is kind of emulating a success that they've seen outside. So at 500 Startups, we are the most active venture capital firm in the world. We have over 1,700 investments, and they're all in over 60 countries, so the most global VC as well. So we see a lot of deals, a lot of technology, a lot of different founder types. Definitely the most exciting is these types that are going to be technologies born in that region that can address problems that everybody has.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Obviously, you guys haven't kicked off yet, but just be interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, we're up and running. We have investments in mostly North America today, but because I have been investing over a long period of time through different firms and funds, etc. One of the things that I sort of speak to a lot is, how do the relationship of a brand and a consumer and how rapidly that's changing. Where many years ago, you would go to, not many years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you'd go to a retailer and that would be your source of education of products and services. And then in an online world, your brands are connecting directly with you in a more meaningful way, where I'm more loyal to a brand than I am to the person who sold that product to me. And that relationship has changed now. North America, this is basically replacing in many ways what Walmart and companies like that, which their relevance is really diminishing, and direct-to-consumer brands have become much more important. Now, as that relates to here in this region, I think it's an incredible opportunity because there's many products and services that have a much more global, kind of a global footprint, and are able to capture global markets through all the distribution channels that that are now widely available. So a small company here with a small budget, like you're saying, can reach a global audience of millions and billions of people with very, very small budgets that they could never do before, because they would first have to get through a small few retail channels, and they no longer have to necessarily do that. So that is creating a lot of opportunities that are interesting for us that we've been able to invest in directly, or some of the enabling technologies around that as well.
Brilliant. So there's a subject that's pretty close to my heart, which is e-commerce platforms. We've got a few over here, right? We've got Soup, we've got Namshi, Jadapado, quite a few of them, and we've got the big announcement of 6 weeks or 2 months ago of Noon.com. But be interested to know what you think the impact of such a big player. Well, we don't know if they're going to be a big player yet, but we can see the investment behind it. They're scheduled to launch next month. Be interested to if that's a good thing for the local ecosystem, or is competition a good thing, or is that going to be a bit of a monopoly? It's no trick question.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So number one, I think competition is a good thing. Commerce has always been the first sector that an emerging market starts with. It's easily identifiable, it's easily addressable, easy to put up, low barriers to entry, unfortunately, and sometimes low margins. So is it the best type of business for us? Not necessarily, but it is going to be the most common first entry point for an ecosystem, and it's needed. Consumers understand it so long as they can transact, and that's where some of the local innovation comes in, when you can't just be an Amazon moving into a region and expect everyone to use credit cards. A lot of people are unbanked in these markets, so to see the innovation on the payment side, innovation on the logistics and delivery side, fulfillment, that's interesting. But to address sort of the other part of the question about new players coming in with very big sort of ambition and capital behind them, it's a wait and see thing for me. It's hard to pass any judgment based on just hype or any talk. Not in our markets, not in tech. You kind of have to see. We had an interesting company in the U.S. where it raised $40 million seed, and it was backed, the founding team was all like, all-star team, backed by all-star VCs. A few months in, everyone's still waiting for it. The whole thing imploded. I won't mention the name, just for...
Yeah, I just want to maybe add to that. Capital is great, but it's not the win-all, right? And so, going back to retail for a second, globally, Walmart has been trying to defeat Amazon for a very long time. Arguably, much better capitalized, has been unable to do so. Other similar industries, right? The automotive industry, very well capitalized, has been trying to beat Tesla and the electric car, and just been unable to. And there's many examples of this, right? The telecommunication industry has been trying desperately to beat WhatsApp, trying desperately to beat many of these companies, and again, massively capitalized. So, being well capitalized is nice, but it doesn't guarantee success.
Yeah.
So, in general, competition is great, as long as broadly it does foster competition. Is not meant to kill competition.
Good answers, actually. Very insightful. So obviously, wherever you guys invest, you need a legal and a governmental structure to aid and guide and be a conducive environment for that investment. What do you think the government can do, whether it's in any part of the region? What is the role of the government in guiding startups and technological advancements in the Middle East? What could they do to accelerate that a little bit more?
So I'll take a stab at that, since I'm sort of in the heat of it right now. But it's something we enjoy doing. So 500 Startups, we consider ourselves ecosystem builders because we come in so early and we do so many bets. So we're doing a $30 million fund here for MENA. Once we start investing, we'll be doing 30 to 50 investments a year, which will be almost like more than the aggregate of all the VCs here. So we will move the needle in our investments. We'll also move the needle in, because we're leading investments, all the other VCs who have been sort of not sure if they were going to move forward on their portfolio will also increase their investments. So that alone will help sort of unlock sort of liquidity in the market for the founders, which has been desperately needed. The other part of it is that you mentioned, sort of regulatory environment, what kind of corporate structures we ask for. Of course, our preference is a Delaware Corp, hands down. But we'll do BVI Corps as well. We love BVI Corps. Cayman, Luxembourg, things that are clear and simple. I mean, that's what an investor looks for. And it's not just for our own protection, it's for the protection of the startups themselves. When that doesn't exist, and you create an Egyptian company or Moroccan company or a Saudi company, what ends up happening is the other investors in the region don't rely on the regulatory environment for their protections. And a lot of them, the majority of the investors, venture capitalists and angels in the region, come from a banking finance background. They apply their know-how. What that ends up doing in this asset class, which is venture capital, is it overstructures deals, the terms and control provisions of the deals at the seed stage. And every subsequent investor wants more control than the previous, right? So what we end up seeing is, commonly around the world in Silicon Valley, we have the Valley of Death, which is like sort of between seed and Series A. A lot of companies struggle to get enough capital to move to the next milestone. Here, that is even more pronounced because companies are struggling to get enough capital even just to prove themselves in the market. And because of these control provisions and sort of the way that the initial terms are laid out, and that is because they're not relying on the overall regulatory environment to protect them, they're relying on their own provisions. They end up taking too much equity for too little capital, doesn't get the startup far enough, and if there's any flat or downside scenario, which will inevitably exist here, the startups get choked and they cannot move forward, or they become uninvestable. I mean, many of the deals I want to do, right when I get to the very end of the conversation, which is, okay, so can you show us your cap table? It's a turnoff. There's no way I'm going to invest in that company at that point. When we look at the original term sheets that they've taken. So we work a lot with governments. We're working a lot with private and public sector really to sort of shape the new economy. It's not just about investments. It's not just about startups. It is the environment they're in. We talked about corporates a little bit. They're going to play a key role. Governments certainly will play a key enabling role. And our advice to governments is, tongue-in-cheek, it's get out of the way, but that doesn't mean don't do anything and sit on the couch. It means actually, in order to get out of the way, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to pave the path forward for investors and startups. Because it's both. How can you attract investors to invest in your local entity, corp types, if they're not safe and they're not protected and their money may not ever get out?
Completely agree with all that. So I'll add one thing a little bit different, which is that the type of investments that we're doing on the global scale are relatively small, which is to say measured in sometimes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, where I said it's more millions of dollars, but still single-digit millions of dollars. And in that world, small structural challenges go a long way in terms of impeding your desire to want to invest, because it makes it more challenging. And one of the things specifically that I can think of that I think would be beneficial is, just facilitating, from a governmental perspective, the ability for individuals and companies to enter, exit, get involved, which is to say that everything from visa requirements, everything from business licenses, those sorts of things where, even my own experience, it was a fairly arduous experience to be able to come here, and I wanted to come here, right? And so when you build a company, especially a technology company, they are not in a small vacuum. They need to work with international partners. They need to find customers globally. They need to attract investors from other parts of the world to take them out of the valley of death so that they can go from a seed to a further stage. And the more from a governmental perspective, the more supportive and enabling to allow, people to get involved, to work with them, to enter, to exit, those sorts of things, then I think that would go a long way to encouraging more people to come, specifically to Saudi or others in other places in this region.
Thanks, guys. We've got time for questions. Well, thank you very much. That's been very insightful, very, very interesting. You guys can, I think you'll be around for a few questions off stage afterwards. So, Sharif, Sumi, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Paul.